It's Wednesday, April 12th, 2017, and this is KBIA's Views of the News. Our weekly roundtable on media behaviors comes to you from the Futures Lab studio at the Reynolds Journalism Institute. I'm Amy Simons, and here with me, as always, are my colleagues Mike McKean and Earnest Perry. On our program this week, a celebration of the year's best print journalism. We'll talk about this year's Pulitzer Prize winners. Sure, there were honors for the New York Times and ProPublica, but it was a big year for community journalism, too. Fox hires a firm to investigate the sexual harassment claims against Bill O'Reilly. But audiences are tuning in record numbers, and his family values book is flying off store shelves. This, too, as he goes on vacation for 2 weeks. And we will look at some of the coverage of last week's military action in Syria. A lot more that hopefully we'll get to as well. But let's start with some issues as it relates to advertising and public relations, because those are as much media stories as all of the others I've just mentioned. By now, you've certainly seen the cell phone video, or maybe several of them, taken from inside United Airlines Flight 3411 of a Chicago Department of Aviation officer forcibly removing David Dow from the plane.
Can't the pilots drive to Louisville? Can't they rent a car for the pilots and have them drive? Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! No! My guys! My God! What are you doing? No! This is wrong! Oh my God! Look at what you did to him!
This led to what can really only be described as a public relations nightmare for the airline, which is not even 2 weeks out from that leggings debacle in which some young girls flying on employee passes were asked not to fly in leggings, violating a dress code. And this was another instance in which the airline was well within its rights, even if the action was taken too far. That became obvious in reading CEO Oscar Munoz's statement posted on Twitter and Facebook on Monday, in which he said the incident was upsetting to everyone at United and offered an apology for having to, quote, re-accommodate the customers. There have been a couple of other statements issued since then, including some live interviews this morning on Wednesday on some of the morning programs on the networks. Not at all what you would consider textbook crisis communication, huh?
This violated every crisis communication operation you could even think about. I mean, this...
Well, maybe it will be the source of textbooks.
I mean, it will be the source of textbook. I mean, this is a classic case study on what not to do. I mean, it's going all the way back to how do you handle this. I mean, number one, whenever you call, and I've said this before, whenever you call the police, bad things happen. Okay, and this was the situation there. I can't believe that they couldn't have come up with something else. But in the aftermath of that, I can't believe that United just didn't come out and do a mea culpa, just right off the top, and say, look, we're sorry that this happened. We're going to go back and look at our procedures, make sure that things are okay. They did this sort of, we're sorry that this happened, but they didn't say they were sorry to him. That reaccommodation, which Twitter sort of blew up on that and used it in all of its various forms to show just how ludicrous the statement is. I mean, they've got some serious issues.
I had a guest speaker in one of my classes yesterday refer to that apology as a Real Housewives sort of an apology, and I'm sorry you feel that way for what happened sort of an apology.
I mean, how often do we talk about this? The apology is worse than the original sin. Right. Sometimes it's constantly compounding it. Think about what kind of protocol should have been in place for a company like this handling PR? I mean, think about the things people complain about the most. Okay, not enough legroom, flight's not on time, baggage fees, and how about, you can get bumped off of a flight because they've oversold the flight. You wouldn't.
Well, here's the thing: they didn't really oversold the flight. What happened was they were trying to get a crew.
They were deadheading a crew to Louisville who needed to stay.
But either way, if you're going to bump somebody from a flight, do you think maybe if there's an elderly gentleman on the flight who's complaining about that you don't have somebody you call before calling them the airport cops to come and drag him down the aisle?
Exactly. I mean, how did they think that was going to play out? I mean, that's the thing that I didn't understand. If you're going to call the police to ask someone to get off a plane, that's not going to end well.
And when you apologize, if you apologize, there's a way to apologize that makes a difference. I mean, first of all, you don't wait around. You don't say, well, we're sorry if we inconvenienced any passengers. Oh, but this passenger was belligerent. But, oh, well, after we've watched the video and you've complained about it for a day or more, now I'm going to give you a real quote-unquote apology. That's kind of how this thing played out.
To me, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in the future, because now you've got Congress talking about doing investigations into this. You've got people who are going on Twitter and on Facebook Live and YouTube and others slashing their United credit cards and their United flight cards and all of that. People basically saying, I will never fly United again. This is going to hurt them in the bottom line.
Which is also interesting, too. Yesterday, I just kind of open up my Snapchat and I'm looking, and I follow American Airlines on Snapchat. And wouldn't you know, American Airlines, which has been pretty quiet on Snapchat the last month or so, suddenly has a big program that they're talking about with their credit cards, and look what we're doing today.
And crisis communications experts could tell you what the playbook is for these things. You have to know what's going to happen on social media if you get caught up in a situation. What, there was a hashtag new United Airlines mottos, and one of them quoted from a story you had was, not enough seating, prepare for a beating. That's going to happen.
Yeah, that's going to happen.
You need to be able to prepare for that. On the other hand, if they had responded quickly and appropriately, I suspect, for good or for ill, this would have blown over fairly quickly. We'll see, for example, later this year when United starts offering flights here in Colombia in competition with American Airlines. Are all the folks in this progressive community going to go, well, look at the way they treated that guy, I'm going to fly on American? Or are they going to appreciate the fact that fares are going down and there's an alternative?
That's a very good point, and that's probably one of the things that United's going to do. You're probably going to see a fare war started by United with the prices going down, because they're going to have to figure out some sort of way to get people to fly
back on those planes. There's also, as we've talked about the public relations and the advertising side of this, there is also an editorial angle to talk about here too, and that is the Day 2 story that was done by the Courier-Journal in Kentucky that really tried to explain, who is this guy? Who is David Dow? What's his history? He had said on the plane he was a doctor. He needed to get back to Louisville in order to see patients. And they looked into some of his past, which showed that there had been some drug convictions going back to 2003, 2004, that his medical license had been suspended and then reinstated. And there's been some criticism that wasn't really relevant to what was going on this week and should have been left alone. Your thoughts on that?
I think if you read the original story in the Louisville Courier-Journal, his hometown newspaper, you'd see that they put it in the proper context. That wasn't the lead of the story. They went into great detail about what happened to him and how people reacted to it. But it is an angle to the story that is worthy of publishing. But because that paper is owned by Gannett, and they have a lot of other papers around the country, including USA Today, it got shared with them. Thus, it becomes a national story. And then you have other news media who are doing the shorthand version of this guy, which focuses too much on his past and not enough on what United did.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think the version in the Courier was appropriate. But then when you send that out and it gets edited down for space reasons, a lot of that is missing, and it becomes more about him and his past and his history as opposed to what happened to him, which is the story.
Okay, well, I wish I could say that United was alone in all of this, but it seems Pepsi is in the same boat. I mean, so much the same boat. There were people trying to be funny on Twitter saying that United Airlines could have avoided this whole thing had they just had some Pepsi.
We are the movement, this generation.
That's because of this rather tone-deaf ad that the soda giant ran online last week featuring model and celebutante Kendall Jenner. In it, she was on the job posing during a photo shoot, only to have a Black Lives Matter protest catch her eye. She threw off the chains of the fashion industry, and she joined the protest. And thanks to a crisp, cold Pepsi, broke down the resolve of the riot police, and then they all danced together in their newfound harmonic state. That ad didn't.
That's what it was.
That's what it was.
Good description?
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. And as you watch it, you kind of go, "What?" It really. We just saw it again, and I cannot understand how this person could be the leader of a protest, any protest. Good or bad? Caitlyn
Jenner, you mean? Not Caitlyn Jenner, I mean Kendall. Caitlyn Jenner. She's the daughter of Caitlyn.
I just don't, what was Pepsi thinking? What were you thinking? How did you think this was going to play out? And I can't believe that someone around the table who thought of this didn't raise their hand and say, guys, we really need to think long and hard about whether or not this is what we want our product to represent.
So first of all, a Kardashian is going to solve the problem between police and African-American protesters.
Kendall Jenner, just in case we have some audience members who are confused.
Yeah.
Kendall Jenner is one of the youngest of the Kardashian clan.
So a
Again,
Kardashian
Caitlyn
clan
and Kris
member.
Kardashian.
So you got that,
Okay.
a fashion model, and here's a white woman riding in, and she's somehow going to solve the problem, right, of clashes between police and the African-American community. All of those things are bad. I will say this much, though. Compare the Pepsi response when it was pointed out how bad this was to how United responded. Pepsi responded immediately. They yanked the ad. They went on social media. They went to the traditional media. They said, we apologize. We were trying to do a good thing, but we screwed up. And we apologize not only to the public, but we apologize to Kendall Jenner for dragging her into this.
So explain this to me, and I have this in my notes specifically to ask you about this. Pepsi felt the need to apologize to Kendall Jenner.
Yeah, why are they apologizing to her?
So
I know why.
why didn't her momager, Kris, who has coined that term herself, why didn't the Jenners and the Kardashians think better of this too?
I can't answer that, but
Yeah,
I will
okay,
say this.
fair
I
enough.
think the reason, my suspicion is the reason that they added Kendall Jenner to the apology list is she is still a huge influencer of young people. And so you don't want her going on social media and saying, I'll never do anything with Pepsi again. Don't drink Pepsi. They dragged me into this thing. I thought it was pretty smart.
They
don't-
dragging her
yeah,
in. They paid her to do
But
it.
I think it was smart of them to try to cover their bases with her as well as with the public.
Yeah, but here's the problem that I have. Okay. To me, this comes from not having. We talk about diversity and inclusion a lot around.
Oh,
this
we're
table.
going to talk about it more.
And what bothers me is that I can't believe that that you had someone around that table who would have said, "Do you understand the kind of message that this is going to send to a huge block of our audience? People who use our product, people we want to use our product and buy our product. This is going to send a very bad message to them." I can't believe that they didn't have someone who didn't raise their hand and say, wait a minute, we need to rethink this.
Yeah, and Amy, you had a piece posted on our Links blog that looked at sort of the inside baseball part of this, the fact that Pepsi used their own internal marketing folks to create this ad, and so you've got ad agencies saying, well, if you'd taken it to some outside pros, we would have vetted this and we'd have caught this before it got to the point where it was. Now, they would say that, of course, to try to absolve themselves,
Right.
but there maybe is something there to be said. A company trying to control their message, well, they controlled it and they owned it because they didn't bring in anybody else to review it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, remember last week when we were talking about the sexual harassment claims against Bill O'Reilly, we talked about the hotline that Fox had set up for people to call and to report those claims or claims like them. Well, one of his accusers, along with her attorney, Lisa Bloom, called into that hotline. Here's what happened.
Hello, thank you for holding. My name is Ariana. Are you calling to make a new report or follow up on one?
I'd like to make a new report, please, but before I continue, I'm recording this telephone call. Is that okay with you?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
And now in 1 or 2 sentences, could you please give me the primary reason for your report?
Yes, in 2013, I experienced sexual harassment as a job applicant at Fox News Channel by an employee named Mr. Bill O'Reilly.
Okay, and I'm sorry, can I just place you on a brief hold for one moment, please?
Certainly.
So the full video is about 4.5 minutes. You can watch the whole thing on our Links blog. There are some parts that are almost kind of humorous because the call went far longer than 4.5 minutes, but they fast forwarded through the time that they were put on hold. But a lot of it was also downright serious as the call center technician took down every detail of her claim.
Well, I mean, I think, Fox is trying to do due diligence here, but I mean, especially after paying out, admitting that they paid out, and they didn't admit it, but they acknowledged that they paid out $13-14 million because of harassment complaints that have been filed against Bill O'Reilly. They are trying to get ahead of this, but it's late in the game because if you've expended that amount of money just paying people off, not to include all the attorney's fees that have gone into it, and now the bad exposure you're getting. I mean, this is just multiplying, especially after what happened with Roger Ailes and the investigation that went into that. Now you're back in investigative mode on one of your top stars, if not the top star. This is another bad PR situation for Fox.
So we're seeing right now that his ratings are at an all-time high. Copies of the book that he's just written about family values, they're like flying off the shelves. Ironically enough, he talks about how to treat women with respect in that book. It looks like the loyal audience is circling the wagons, and on his show last night announces he's going on vacation for 2 weeks. It's time for a spring and Easter break. You think he'll come?
He'd been planning this since
forever.
the fall, and it was no big deal. I think the jury
Doesn't everybody leave for vacation on a Tuesday?
Yeah, right. And I think that the jury is still out on whether Fox is getting out in front of this or not. Now,
I said they're trying to get out.
Something's going on for him to be going on vacation, and there's speculation in the media that perhaps one of the Murdoch sons, who's the CEO of the company, wants him out of there. But there's some family struggle. I don't know. We'll find out. But I also have to say, I think that the lawyer and the plaintiff that we played the tape from, the complaint was legitimate, but also they played a really good job of media manipulation, because one of the things Fox said in response to the accusations against O'Reilly was, well, nobody has used the hotline to complain about him. So, okay, we'll use the hotline. We'll call, and because they called the hotline, then Fox announces we're going to investigate her claim. I don't know that would have happened otherwise.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, but the other parts of this is that, and you mentioned the fact that his ratings have gone up, his book is flying off the shelf. That's all great, but the advertisers, which are really paying the money here, they're flying away from Bill O'Reilly. They're running like their house is on fire. To get away from this guy. That is what Fox is concerned about, and I believe that had contributed to his early vacation or his planned vacation.
And when we talked about this last week, I think there was like 20 advertisers that had pulled out, and Fox was pointing out that, but we put their ads in other programs, so we weren't losing any money. Well, now it's 60-some sponsors who've pulled out, and you can only sell so many adjacencies and other programs, because now they're down from like an average of 40 or so spots per hour on that show to about 20. So at some point, that's going to hurt financially.
And then you end up with that inventory, which lowers the prices on the inventory that you can't.
But this is going to be the interesting part. They said they're going to be bringing in guest hosts. My perception of this is that they're going to see who plays well.
That's
here.
right. This is the merry-go-round trial situation.
Right, exactly.
Okay, well, while we're on the topic of cable news, let's shift gears slightly and talk about the coverage last Thursday night of the airstrikes in Syria. It was the first military action of the new administration and gave us some, interesting insights, like this clip from MSNBC. Take a listen to Brian Williams.
We see these beautiful pictures at night from the decks of these two U.S. Navy vessels in the eastern Mediterranean. I am tempted to quote the great Leonard Cohen, I'm guided by the beauty of our weapons. And they are beautiful pictures of fearsome armaments.
I'm sorry, it's just bizarre to me. How does anybody describe the bombing of somebody else's country as beautiful?
I don't know. I heard that.
I mean, has Brian Williams learned nothing?
Yeah, I actually heard that live, and I'm sitting there on my couch and listening to him, and I'm going like, what are you talking about? Just tell us what's going on. Don't give us all this other stuff.
Well, I mean, it's too clever by half, but it's indicative of how a lot of journalists, and not just TV journalists, responded to this. It's basically, now he's being presidential finally for the first time by bombing an airfield but he gave warning to the Russians, and who gave warning to the Syrians, so nobody was there. He changed his foreign policy overnight. Is that being presidential? I don't know. Meanwhile, you have the media who've been in Trump's camp all along, the Breitbarts and the alt-right media, all of a sudden are attacking him.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, you said America first, and that means isolationism and staying out of foreign wars, and here you are turning your backs on us. It was pretty ironic to see the change on both sides.
It was the whole thing was weird, because when I initially saw it, and they broke into network programming to put this up, and I was. At that time, I was at the gym, and I'm on the machine, and I look up, and it goes special report, and I go like, oh boy, this can't be good. and it comes on, and you have this sort of, I won't say it was glowing, but it was almost as if, as you said, Mike, everything changed in the way in which they viewed.
It was a monumental shift.
The president. Yeah. And it's sort of like, but wait a minute. At 5:30, before this happened, he was, president not knowing what he was supposed to be doing, and he's all over the place. And now all of a sudden, he's the president. And it was just the weirdest thing.
And here's the thing. The media coverage feeds a narrative that the White House wants to make. Now, I'm not saying the president wasn't influenced by seeing those dead and dying children. He may have been.
Right.
He may have made the right decision. That's for other people to decide. But clearly the White House is taking advantage of the way the media is covering this. So we had an example of his son, Eric Trump, coming out and saying, this proves that my dad doesn't have any kind of nefarious relationship with the Russians, because if he did, he wouldn't have bombed Syria.
Yeah, but he told him first. He was coming. So I've got a problem.
Wow.
So I don't know.
Well, and there were still some questions about this at yesterday's White House press briefing.
We didn't use chemical weapons in World War II. You had someone as despicable as Hitler, who didn't even sink to using chemical weapons. So you have to, if you're Russia, ask yourself, is this a country that you, and a regime that you want to align yourself with?
Thanks. I just want to give you the opportunity to clarify something you said that seems to be
Thank
gaining
you.
some traction right now. Quote, Hitler didn't even sink to the level of using chemical weapons. What did you mean by that?
I think when you come to sarin gas, he was not using the gas on his own people the same way that Assad is doing. I mean, there was clearly, I understand your point. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. There was not he brought him into the Holocaust Center. I understand that. But I'm saying in the way that Assad used them, where he went into towns, dropped them down to innocent into the middle of towns, it was brought to it. So the use of it, and I appreciate the clarification there. That was not the intent.
Intent or not, that clarification was almost worse than what he said in the first place. What was it he was attempting to say? Because I still can't figure it out.
Well, so James Mattis, the defense secretary, made a similar argument, but was much more clear about it, I think, earlier in the day at a news conference, where he said basically even the Nazis didn't use chemical weapons in the battlefield, okay? And if he had said that, it still would have been questionable, but he wasn't trying to say that, well, gassing your own citizens, in death camps.
Well, I'm sorry, German Jews were still Germans.
They were.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, to me, it's one of those things where, this is the third time I've watched it, and he should have just stopped and collected his thoughts and then went on. But the more he kept trying to talk his way out of it, the deeper he got into it. Yeah. And he didn't have his facts straight. He wasn't clear about what he was saying, and it made it worse.
And not a good position for a presidential press secretary, but as soon as he kind of realized the hole he was getting into, he lost his language. Holocaust centers?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And then to say that, that they didn't use sarin. Well, the Nazis invented sarin. So, the whole thing just sort of, the mistakes multiplied the more he kept talking.
And I mean, I do think, it was painful to watch. It was inappropriate to say, all the things that we would agree on. I think Sean Spicer, if he didn't have the relationship with the press corps, the strained relationship that he has now by trying to defend a president who's done some very controversial things in the first 80, 90 days, maybe the press corps would have given him a little break, or there would have been some way to try to walk that back. But nobody's going to give him the third strike.
I mean, I agree with you, Mike, but they actually gave him an opportunity to clarify.
You see that in the video. She gave him an opportunity to clarify. And he thanked her for the opportunity and then stepped into it further.
Exactly.
To make the timing of this even worse, it happens on the first full day of Passover. And this isn't the first time he made that equally egregious misstep when making a statement about World Holocaust Day, not having any kind of a statement including the Jews in that. Does he survive this? Does he have a job at the end of the day, at the end of the week?
I don't know, but one of the things that we do know, because President Trump has said this, is that he, above everything else, he wants loyalty, and Spicer is loyal to him. And as long as he sees him as a benefit and being loyal to him, I think he's going to stay. But it's starting to multiply, and that's going to be a problem.
Well, and the thing is, the president says he wants loyalty above all else, but the question is, what kind of loyalty does he give back? Look at what happened. I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but look what's happening to Steve Bannon this week. Basically, if he gets in a fight with Jared Kushner, the only person that Trump seems to be, loyal to is his family.
No, I agree with you on that point.
Okay, well, remember, actually, I wanted to mention how this has been a year for David beating Goliath, and we saw that yesterday in the awarding of this year's Pulitzer Prizes, with several of them going to community newspapers. Sure, there were the awards that went to the stalwarts, like the New York Times with its 3 awards, ProPublica getting one, but we also saw the East Bay Times winning the award in the breaking news category for that Oakland warehouse fire where the people had been living in the miszoned property. We also saw local reporting going to the Salt Lake Tribune, editorial writing going to a guy named Art Cullen from the Storm Lake Times in Storm Lake, Iowa. This provides a much-needed shot in the arm for community and local journalism.
I think it does. I mean, it shows that there is good journalism outside of the big boys, and that they're doing journalism, they're doing editorials that matter to the people in their communities, and they're getting credit for it, and I think that's a very good thing.
I think that's a good sign, too. But I want to talk about one of the Davids. That was David Farenthold from the Washington Post. A big city
that
paper.
That was a pun I didn't even mean when I wrote that.
They watch lots of...
Nice, though.
But here's what I like about it. He was doing community journalism of a kind, too, when he was showing basically that Trump's charities weren't really giving a lot of money to folks, and maybe were even breaking the law in the process. He relied on the online community to help him to document this story. And I thought that played into that reporting in ways that were worthy of reward,
well,
too.
I also think that we need to talk about ProPublica and BuzzFeed.
Okay,
and the work that they did. I mean, you had a consortium of news operations. I'm talking about ProPublica and the Miami Herald and others. This consortium that came together that broke the story about the bank down in Central America that was basically hiding money, funneling money for all sorts of nefarious operations. And I think that was a good piece of journalism. It shows that if we can have a cooperative agreement between journalism organizations, we can get a lot of big international stories done.
Collaboration is just as important as the competition between us.
Exactly. But let's don't focus too much on prizes. They might be nice for a couple of days, but they're not going to repair our reputation.
No, that's true.
Okay, well, we'll have to do that ourselves. That music means we're pretty much out of time for this week. I'd like to thank you for spending the last half hour with us. You can read more about the topics we talked about today on our links blog. That's under the Programs tab at KBIA.org. Like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @ViewsOnKBIA. These are all great ways to watch and listen to our program again. You can leave us comments or questions, see previews of what we'll be talking about next week, and more. Our thanks to RJI's Travis McMillan for directing today's show, and to Pat Akers for handling the audio. Tim Pilcher composed our original theme music. Lauren Wortman is our associate producer, and I'm Amy Simons. Be sure to join us again next week when we're back with you for another edition of Views of the News.